The State of Kuwait today celebrates the 52nd anniversary of the National Day of its independence. Today commemorates a great event in the State of Kuwait's history. Every 25th of February marks the celebration of the country's National Day. The occasion is celebrated with fireworks and festivities, with Kuwaitis wearing their national dress. The State of Kuwait gained its independence from the United Kingdom in the year 1961, and thus, since the dawn of independence, the country has been taking gradual and firm steps towards comprehensive rise under the wise rule of its leaders. Since the independence, efforts exerted for building the State of Kuwait reflected the wisdom of its political leadership and stood as indicators of a better and wider horizon future towards further human achievements in the Kuwaiti arena. Although the state actually gained full sovereignty and independence from the British Protectorate on June 19, 1961, it still celebrates its National Day on the 25th of February every year to commemorate the accession of the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah, the 11th ruler of the country. Independence means freedom of the state and its independent entity, and that it performs its external mission without other tutelage. This was achieved through the Independent Agreement signed by the father of the Constitution, then Sheikh Abdullah Salim, the 11th ruler of the State of Kuwait. Due to the important role Sheikh Abdullah Salim played in the state's independence and laying down the foundation of modern state, a decree was issued in 1963 to integrate the National Day with his accession to the throne.
إخواني أولادي في هذا اليوم العظيم من تاريخ وطننا العزيز نستقبل الذكرى الأولى لعيد الكويت الوطني بقلوب ملؤها البهجة والحبوب بما حقق الله لهذا الشعب من عزة وكرامة ونفوس كلها عزيزة بالسير والهمم في بناء هذا الوطن والعمل بالروح والثابت بما يحقق لأبنائه من رفعة ورفاهية وعدالة اجتماعية لجميع المواطنين.
The history of Kuwait's Independence Day goes back to the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when Kuwait asked for the British protection in September 1897 due to a dispute with the Ottoman state. When the late Emir Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah, the 7th ruler of the State of Kuwait, also known as Great Mubarak, came to power in Kuwait on May 17, 1896, a new phase in the history of the State of Kuwait began. This phase was characterized by international interest in its territory, the inauguration of railway projects such as the Berlin-Baghdad Railway and coal stations. Sheikh Mubarak is credited with establishing a modern Kuwait. A highly intelligent and astute individual, he was able to deal effectively with the constant imperialistic ambitions. His skill, political acumen, and vast experience were the central characteristics of his policies during his reign. Above all, the welfare of the Kuwaiti people and the country itself were placed at the top of his agenda. From the beginning, Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah realized the threat approaching from the Ottoman Empire, which was the greatest Islamic government at that time. So he took a decisive step to protect his country from direct or indirect Ottoman intervention. In February 1897, he asked to meet with Colonel Meade, the British political resident in the Arabian Gulf, to ask for British protection to prevent the dominance of the Ottoman Empire over his country. Though the position of Kuwait was important to British interests, and this importance had been known since 1775, Great Britain did not desire to protect the state of Kuwait because of the required military and financial commitments, not to mention its inclination not to disturb its relations with the Ottoman Empire. However, in the year 1898, many elements incited Britain to reconsider its policy towards the state of Kuwait, such as the Ottoman military activities near Basra and the Russian and German plans that were threatening British interests in the region of the Arabian Gulf. Thus, on the basis of a decision from Lord Curzon, the British Viceroy in India, British political resident Meade concluded a protectorate agreement with Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah on January 23, 1899, in which Kuwait was defined as an independent country under the British protection. Under this agreement, Britain promised to protect Sheikh Mubarak and his heirs, and in turn the latter agreed to conclude no treaties with other powers, to admit no foreign agents, and to cede no part of Kuwait's territory without British consent. The agreement limited the rights of Kuwait to deal conclusively with its lands without British approval, while one of the most prominent features of the agreement was that Sheikh Mubarak should not accept any agent or representatives of any foreign country without the British government's consent. In addition, Sheikh Mubarak agreed that Britain assigns a commissioner in Kuwait. Political commissioners were assigned till the declaration of the State of Kuwait's independence in 1961. However, the agreement did not give Britain the right to intervene in the internal affairs of the country, as in November 1914, Britain recognized Kuwait as an independent emirate that enjoyed British protection. Kuwait took advantage of this treaty to build and strengthen the basis of a modern state. This treaty has provided foreign political stability and protection from external threats and greed, which made this foreign stability an internal constructive factor. Rulers of Kuwait were able to take care and build the emirate after they got rid of the concern of external greed. Therefore, on the internal scene, Kuwait witnessed advances both related to the rule and the local administration. In 1921, the State Consultative Council was formed by appointment when the country's dignitaries met the ruling Al-Sabah family and demanded greater participation in running the country. As a result of the meeting, the first Shura, or Consultative Council, was established, paving the way for greater reformist steps, which are the establishment of the first and second Legislative Councils that were based in 1938 and 1939. Kuwait adopted democracy and Shura to be the principles of running the country's affairs. Democracy, which is based on public participation, serves justice and provides security for both the rulers and the subjects.
This is a system, when we talk about building nations and countries and states, one of the theories is the contract theory, in which there's a contract, or what we call social contract, between the rulers and the ruled, the people and the rulers. And this is how it happened in Kuwait. It was an agreement. It was a contract between Al-Sabah family and the people of Kuwait. There was an agreement that Al-Sabah family would rule and respect the will and the desires of all the people, protect the people, keep the freedom and liberties, and the people would obey the rule of Al-Sabah family. And this arrangement continued for over 300 years now. And that's why when we say we are proud of our democracy, we say it's a special kind of democracy, because the moment that Kuwait was born, 300 or 300+ years ago, it was born as a democracy, as an agreement between the ruler and the ruled. And this is this depth in history, and this long time in history, is the one that protecting Kuwait and its existence as a country, because the democracy that we have in Kuwait is not something imported from outside. It's something that was born with Kuwait itself.
Also, the second national regular school was established and called Al-Ahmadiyya School. It was given the name of the Emir of Kuwait at that time, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah. Furthermore, the first national regular school had been inaugurated in December 1911. It was called Al-Mubarakiyya School after the name of Sheikh Mubarak Al-Sabah. The municipality was then founded in 1930, and the members of the city council were elected in 1932 when Kuwait witnessed the first election in its history. Since 1934, Kuwaiti-British relations went beyond the Arab domain. They were influenced by other greater international influences due to the competition of American companies in drilling for oil in Kuwait and other emirates of the Arabian Gulf. However, the life was difficult during that period due to the fact that the traditional economy of Kuwait, like any other country or emirate in the Arabian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, was closely based on the sea. The main sources of income, therefore, were from diving for pearls, fishing, shipbuilding, and nets, as well as other activities related to the desert, such as herding, were the professions prevailing at that current time. In 1934, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait at the time, signed an agreement that was to increase his country's wealth and international importance. The first Kuwait Oil Concession Agreement was awarded to Kuwait Oil Company, which was formed by the Gulf Oil Corporation and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Then, in 1936 to 1938, the primary drilling operations proved that Kuwaiti lands were rich in oil, a matter that dramatically increased the importance of the country. Subsequently, in 1938, oil was discovered in the Burgan field of Kuwait. In 1946, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah turned a silver wheel to start Kuwait's first crude oil export abroad, the tanker British Fusilier. This enabled the State of Kuwait to join the ranks of the world's major oil producers. Simultaneously with this economic, cultural, and population development, Kuwait proceeded towards progress and independence since the beginning of the 50s. The economic, intellectual, and cultural movement flourished in Kuwait, and the number of the literate people and schools had also increased. In addition, more educational missions were sent to the universities all over the world. During that period, Kuwaiti society had to face many internal and external challenges as Kuwait evolved from a poor country to a rich one that enjoyed great financial potentiality. At many different levels, oil production was a turning point for Kuwait, a matter which intensified Britain's interest in the country as its international importance had also increased. At the beginning of the 1950s, Kuwait witnessed development and reformation in the local administration. The High Executive Committee was formed in 1954, then the Supreme Council and the Organizational Authority in 1956. In addition to governmental local councils such as the Education Council, the City Council, and the Health Council, Kuwait was headed for independence and national political awareness was also increasing. Meanwhile, the activities of the Kuwaiti youth also increased and they started to criticize the administrative conditions. At that time, the Emir of Kuwait was Sheikh Abdullah Salim Al-Sabah, who had been chairman of the first parliament in Kuwait in the year 1938. Sheikh Abdullah Sabah welcomed constructive criticism and was keen to achieve fully considered steps on the ways to independence and constitutional government reform. If Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah maintained Kuwait's international and political position, then Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah established the country's pillars of authority by founding the legal and constitutional institutions that enhanced its independence and further promoted democracy and progress. The era of Sheikh Abdullah Salim was the real set-off point on the path of independence. He had taken vigorous steps towards establishing independent constitutional state from the moment he took office in 1950. Along the way to full independence, which Sheikh Abdullah Salim had resolved to see to the end, Kuwait took steps to enact laws and establish systems such as the neutralization law in 1959, the Kuwaiti currency law in 1960, the passports law, and the organization of government departments. In fact, Kuwait was not apart from interaction and participation in many Arab social and cultural activities, as well as those of the Arab League. Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah realized that the Protectorate Agreement was no longer appropriate after the changes that had taken place in the conditions of Kuwait. At that time, Kuwait was headed for independence and had already taken large strides on its way, as the Kuwaiti people no longer accepted the restrictions imposed by the Protectorate Agreement, though they realized very well that this protectorate had many advantages during that period. However, circumstances had changed, which necessitated cancellation of the agreement. Thus, the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah expressed his desire to replace the old agreement with a new friendship agreement that went along with the development and changes that had occurred. On the other hand, the British government accepted the Kuwaiti demand. Diplomatic notes were exchanged between Sir William Loss, the British political resident in the Arabian Gulf at that time, and Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah. The agreement included the cancellations of the 1988 treaty, as it was incompatible with the sovereignty and independence of the State of Kuwait. In addition, that the relations between Britain and Kuwait shall continue on the basis of strong friendship, and when appropriate, the two governments would consult together on matters which concerned them both. Nothing in these conclusions would affect the readiness of the British government to assist the Kuwaiti government if the latter requested such assistance. In so doing, Kuwait declared its independence on the 19th of June, 1961. A few months after its independence, the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah gave instructions for the formation of a popular committee to draft a modern constitution for an independent Kuwait. The draft constitution was laid down by a constituent assembly of 20 members elected by people. 11 ministers were added to them from outside the assembly. Preparations and discussions of the articles of the Constitution took almost 6 months. It outlined Kuwait's system of governance as a fully independent Arab state with a democratic style of government where sovereignty rests with the nation, which is the source of power. On January 11, 1962, the will of Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah corresponded with that of the people's representatives and ratified the draft constitution, as the representatives drew it without any amendment to its articles. The constitution then came into force on the 29th of January 1963, when the first session of the National Assembly of the State of Kuwait convened after public elections were held to elect members for the first National Assembly ever in the country. It established a democratic system with a National Assembly holding legislative authority and the Emir and his Council of Ministers maintaining the executive powers. The Kuwaiti Constitution guarantees a broad range of freedoms and rights, including freedom of conscience and religion, personal liberty, and sanctity of private property, equality before the law, and the right to legal process, and above all, the complete freedom of press. The National Assembly, that currently includes 50 directly elected members, represents the legislative power.
After liberation, after independence from Britain in 1961, the ruling family, of the late Abdullah Salim, thought to have Parliament Kuwait. First time we start the first democracy in the whole Gulf. We cannot claim our democracy the best in the world, or close to democracy in the world, but we can claim in this region we are the first and the best, in spite of all the problems between the government and the parliament. But we're still the most free country in the whole area, and we do have our own problem, but we are the best in terms of freedom, speech, press, media, and traveling, freedom of speech. You won't find any country in the Gulf. Should be proud these days, and we shouldn't forget the role of women. We are the first country in the Gulf allow women to vote. Women now have, 2 or 3 members of parliament now in this parliament. Before were 4 women before. Those were very qualified people. They work very hard. I think we have 2 women in parliament, 1 in the government. This one step. I wish to see more women participation, more openness.
However, the cabinet is appointed by the Emir, who represents the executive power and is answerable to Parliament. The government departments were reorganized so as to be able to implement the overall development movement and its further plans. Most of the cabinet members were chosen from among the elected members of the National Assembly. After a long history of struggle, the Kuwaiti Parliament approved the granting of political rights to women in 2005. The history of the Kuwaiti Parliament took a new turn when 4 women with a PhD degree won the election. Kuwaiti democracy and constitutional life that guarantees civil rights and stability of citizens is a model in the Arab Spring that swept the region recently. The effective stability that Kuwait enjoys allows Kuwait to maintain a responsible role at the international as well as the regional levels. Therefore, the validity of the democratic experience in Kuwait as a model within the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, is to play an important role in building and consolidating stability in the post-Arab Spring revolutions. The inception of the State of Kuwait since its independence half a century ago is on the democratic foundations in the framework of a modern constitutional system. It has regulated relationships between the authorities to guarantee the rights of the citizen and the establishment of a genuine parliamentary life. Following the declaration of its independence, a newly born state would normally seek to join the international community as a first step towards the recognition of its independence. Furthermore, Kuwait asked for the Arab League membership, where the Council of Ministers later met on July 16, 1961, and issued a resolution accepting Kuwait as one of its members. As a proactive member of the League, Kuwait has been a major contributor and initiator in all of the League's programs and agendas. The League promotes politics, economy, culture, and social safety in the Arab world. The Security Council also started to take consideration into Kuwait's demands to join the United Nations on May 14, 1963. Then, Kuwait got the approval and became the 111th member of the United Nations. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, delivered Kuwait's speech at the UN in a historic moment of Kuwait's march. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, the current Emir of Kuwait, had been a leading political figure in the modern history of the country and headed Kuwait's diplomacy since 1963 when he became the country's foreign minister. His Highness Sheikh Sabah had taken up official duties when he was appointed on July 19, 1954 by the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah as member of the Higher Executive Committee assigned with regulating operations in governmental departments and placing plans for their activities. His Highness Sheikh Sabah was then appointed as Chairman of the Department of Social Affairs and Chairman of the Department of Press and Publications in 1957. And after Kuwait's declaration of independence, he was appointed as the Director of both the Department of Press and Publications and the Department of Social Affairs and Labor. On August 26, 1961, the Higher Executive Committee, which had carried out the duties of today's cabinet, was formed, and His Highness Sheikh Sabah became a member as chairman of the two departments and later became a member of the Constituent Assembly assigned with placing the new Kuwaiti Constitution. When departments were regulated into ministries in November 1962, His Highness Sheikh Sabah came to hold a number of ministerial positions, including the Minister of Guidance and Information, which is now known as the Minister of Information. His Highness Sheikh Sabah was also appointed head of the Kuwaiti delegations to the United Nations and the Arab League, and became Minister of Foreign Affairs and head of the Permanent Committee of Gulf Aid in February 1963. As minister, His Highness Sheikh Sabah became a member of the National Assembly since its establishment in 1963. And witnessed the different constitutional events that took place during that period. His Highness Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmad had represented the late Emir, His Highness Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, in many local and international conferences and meetings throughout the years. As for the different ministerial positions that His Highness Sheikh Sabah has held, he was First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs in the 16th Cabinet that was formed on October 18, 1998, and the 20th Cabinet that was later formed on February 14, 2001. His Highness Sheikh Sabah was also acting Minister of Information from the 2nd of February 1971 until the 3rd of February 1975, in addition to his post as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and was appointed Deputy Prime Minister on February 16, 1978, also in addition to his post as Minister of Foreign Affairs. His Highness was appointed Minister of Information on the 9th of February 1982, in addition to his posts as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and therefore had to relinquish his position as Minister of Information in 1985. Then he was appointed Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs on the 3rd of March 1985, and appointed as First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs on October 18, 1992. On July 13, 2003, an Emiri decree was issued appointing His Highness Prime Minister and assigning him to the formation of a new cabinet. His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah took the oath in a special session after the demise of the late Emir, His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, thus becoming Kuwait's 15th Emir and commencing a new and bright era. As a member nation of the United Nations, the State of Kuwait is a strong supporter of the role of the UN in preserving international peace and security. It firmly believes in international cooperation to fight all forms of terror and coercion that threaten individuals and other nations. The state supports every country's right to defend itself and to restore sovereign rights as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. However, at the Gulf level, the country was instrumental in the formation of the Gulf Cooperation Council, through which the states of the Gulf maintain regional security, stability, and progress. In its role as a member of the Gulf states, Kuwait, along with other Arabian Gulf countries, formed the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, in the year 1981. The Council epitomizes the spirit of brotherhood and cooperation that exists among the Arab states. The aim of the Council is to intensify efforts and to broaden cooperation among its members in every field for the interest of the Arab nation as a whole. The GCC operates within the general framework of the Arab League, and it continues, complements, and completes the agenda of the Arab League body. Kuwait's army, on the other hand, is also an active member of the Peninsula Shield Force, which is the joint force of the GCC. At the Arab level, Kuwait seeks to enhance and justify its relations with other Arab states in all fields as well. Recent efforts towards the unification of the GCC at all levels have found a proactive advocate in Kuwait. Kuwait also became an important player in the international family of nations when its wealth became a major foreign aid donor. The Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development, or KFAED, commonly known as the Kuwait Fund, was established by Sheikh Abdullah immediately after the country's independence. The Kuwait Fund is active throughout the Arab world and beyond, through which Kuwait independently supports projects in non-Arab, non-Muslim nations as well as Arab and Muslim nations, and has given as much as 8% of its annual gross national product in foreign aid. The disbursement of these large sums of development aid remain a respected tradition and a major plank in Kuwait's foreign policy to this day, both in Africa and in the Arab world. The Kuwait Fund is the State of Kuwait's agency for the provision and administration of financial and technical assistance to developing countries. It was founded in December 1961, and it was operational shortly after the country's independence, ensuring that Kuwait's newly discovered oil wealth was put to benefit its neighbors and friends alike.
وقد أنشأت مع استقلالها أقدم مؤسسة تمويلية في العالم العربي والشرق الأوسط، وهو الصندوق الكويتي للتنمية الاقتصادية العربية لتقديم العون والمساعدة إلى الدول الشقيقة والصديقة والدول المحتاجة، حتى وصل هذا الأمر إلى أقصى ديار المعمورة. هذا وقد دأبت الكويت على انفتاحها الإيجابي المتوازن فيما يحكم سياستها الخارجية، التزاما بثوابتها الوطنية المبدئية واحتراما للشرعية الدولية، تأسيسا لروابط وعلاقات إقليمية ودولية قائمة على التعاون البناء في إطار المصالح المشتركة والاحترام المتبادل. ولقد سلكت الكويت طريق الخير في دعم القضايا العاجلة بتعاونها مع الدول العربية والإسلامية وسائر الدول الصديقة في العالم، لا سيما شقيقاتها دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، وبمساندة المنظمات الدولية وتعزيز دورها في المحافظة على الأمن والسلام الدوليين.
The fund was created as a message from the Kuwaiti people, ensuring that they are embarking on the tides of change but will not forget their friends in need. The Kuwait Fund is the first aid agency in the world to be established by a developing country. The KFAED was originally established with a capital of 50 million Kuwaiti dinars, and this increased to 200 million Kuwaiti dinars by 1966. Highlighting the civilized role of Kuwait, the country declared $150 million donations to support a program that finances scientific researches related to energy, environment, and climate change at the third summit of OPEC in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia capital Al Riyadh in 2007. On Kuwait's initiative for supporting small and medium enterprises, the State of Kuwait launched an estimated capital of $2 billion in the Conference of the Arab Summit for Economic and Social Development in 2009. Meanwhile, regarding its efforts in unifying the Arabs during the donor conferences that were held in Kuwait in 2010, a contribution of $500 million was allocated to East Sudan for infrastructure projects and services. Kuwait also donated 1 million Kuwaiti dinars to the Tour of Hope project under His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah and the Al Sabah family. The tour is in charge of people with intellectual disabilities. Meanwhile, on the 16th of October 2012, an initiative of $2 billion for financing development projects in non-Arab Asian countries in the first Asian Cooperation Dialogue or ACD Summit was announced. More recently, during the Syria Donors Conference held in Kuwait in January 2013, the State of Kuwait pledged a whopping $300 million to help fund humanitarian relief efforts for millions of Syrians affected by the nearly 2 years of conflict. Turning now to Kuwaiti private sector, it represents a unique model amongst the countries of the region as a result of what has been achieved over the past 50 years. The 1950s and the 1960s of the last century are considered the most important period in the history of the private sector in Kuwait. It took on the task of setting up a large group of private companies and institutions and taking the risk to invest in entirely new areas not only in the region but also worldwide. The focus in recent years on Kuwait's private sector has been in key areas such as finance, insurance, real estate, transportation, communication, the wholesale and retail industry, restaurants and hotels. As classified by the World Economic Forum rating for 2009, Kuwait was ranked number 54 in the world and ranked first among the Arab countries for its use of technology in the workplace and at home. Kuwait was the first Arab country that joined the GATT Convention in 1963. As in 1995 of January, it joined the World Trade Organization or the WTO. Kuwait strongly encourages foreign investment, and it has accepted free trade in principle by signing agreements with various countries of the region such as Morocco, Egypt, Sudan, Jordan, Tunisia, Lebanon, Algeria, and Syria. Recently, Kuwait held many regional and international gatherings on its soil, including a NATO and Iraq neighbor conference and an Islamic Economic Forum. One of the greatest tragedy that tested Kuwait's independence and sovereignty was the invasion of the former Iraqi regime on the state of Kuwait. The adversity of the 2nd of August 1990 began when huge armed units of the former Iraqi regime crossed the Kuwaiti borders. Scattered battles took place between the Iraqi forces and the Kuwaiti army, ending in the occupation of the state of Kuwait for 7 months, in an unprecedented incident along the current century.
We are 3 human beings. For almost 7 months, we were handicapped, we were jailed, we were, as Kuwaiti, hijacked by somebody else. And it wasn't somebody else, it was a neighboring country, an Arab country, a Muslim country, and it was a tragic moment, a tragic period, not for me as a student of politics, but also as a citizen of Kuwait who was shocked by this tragic Holocaust issue. Really, I could call it a Holocaust for all the Kuwaitis who lived inside of Kuwait or outside of Kuwait. So I wish a person who knows what's the meaning of a Holocaust, it was the Kuwaiti Holocaust.
Since the first moments of the invasion, the international community, represented in the International Security Council, solidly condemned the Iraqi invasion of the state of Kuwait in an emergency meeting convened based on the request of both the state of Kuwait and the United States of America. In the presence of its Secretary General at that time, Javier Solana, issued its resolution number 660 requesting the Republic of Iraq to withdraw all its forces immediately and unconditionally to its locations before the 2nd of August and the commencement of negotiations between the two countries for settling their differences.
And it was a terrible invasion. The Iraqi invasion at the time, under the rule of Saddam Hussein, was very brutal. It tried to eradicate Kuwait as a state. It tried to make Kuwait, acquire Kuwait and make it belong to Iraq. And Kuwaitis were tortured, Kuwaitis were killed.
However, the Iraqi regime refused to bow to the will of the international community, insisting on its stance and pretending that this military action was an internal Iraqi affair. The adversity of the Iraqi invasion highlighted how far the Kuwaiti people were united, solid, and resistant to the occupation, in addition to their support to their legal government and its leadership. Kuwait's sovereignty, independence, and the safety of its land were never compromised. Such solidarity was admired by the whole world. Kuwaitis proudly remember the great role played by their late Emir, Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, to restore Kuwait's sovereignty and free it from the tyrant invasion. During the first weeks of the invasion, His Highness the late Emir Sheikh Jabir issued a number of Emiri orders and decrees for managing the internal affairs of the country, the most important of which were the temporary meeting of the government in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, ministers' continuity to perform their duties, and arranging the financial and living standards of Kuwaiti families abroad. On the international level, His Highness exerted several efforts, including mobilization of international support, attending conferences, and participating in international activities, as well as sending Kuwaiti delegations to different countries to explain the situation and rally support.
جئت إليكم لأطلعكم على حول المحنة والعذاب الذين نعيشهما داخل وخارج أرضنا الحبيبة المحتلة، وعارضا عليكم قضية بلاد العادلة، ولأترك لضمائركم وبين أيديكم مصير شعب وأمة. وأنا على يقين بأنكم لن ترضوا عن مساندة حقوقه المشروعة في تحرير أرضه بديلا كما أنكم لن تترددوا إطلاقا في اتخاذ الإجراءات الكفيلة بحمل المعتدين الغزاة على إعادة الشرعية والتراجع عن همجيتهم وانحرافهم.
The efforts of His Highness the late Emir Sheikh Jabir commenced with the participation in the Emergency Arab Summit Conference, which was convened in Cairo on the 10th of August 1990, where the Arab leaders shouldered their historical responsibility towards the State of Kuwait for ending the occupation and restoring legitimacy. His Highness also directed a message to the International Islamic Conference, which was held on the 10th of September 1990 in the holy city of Mecca, where he stressed the principles of Islam and the pillars of faith, most important of which is supporting the right, lifting injustice, and deterring the oppressive group. On the 17th of January 1991, the United States of America and its allies executed their obligations pursuant to the Security Council Resolution number 678 by forcing the Iraqi regime to withdraw from all Kuwaiti lands. The Desert Storm War, as it was called by the international allied forces, resulted in achieving its goal of liberating the state of Kuwait on the 26th of February 1991 and the return of the legitimate government. Kuwaitis played a considerable role in resistance and liberation. The Kuwaiti people confrontation of the enemy formed a unique phase in the history of this country and their struggle in defending their homeland, during which several males and females paid their valuable lives for their country. The 26th of February 1991 was indeed a unique day. It materialized the story of a people whose land was occupied, but they resisted, won, and were liberated. On the same day, Kuwaitis annually renew their gratitude to all those who supported the Kuwaiti cause. The importance of the Arabian Gulf and Kuwait in history and in the international relations and international trade in particular stretches back to the old distant ages. The importance of Kuwait aroused when some highly dignified families like the El Sabah and other families who immigrated with them came to inhabit it. The first mention of Kuwait in history was during the Greek era in the 3rd century BC, after the army of Alexander the Great captured the island of Failaka, which the Greeks called Icarus. The island has been home for some of the Greeks, foreign traders, and some local residents. The state of Kuwait was known as Gurin since the early 17th century. Named Gurin or Kuwait as a diminutive of Garn and Kut. Garn means hill or highland, and Kut means castle or fortress. Kuwait was inhabited in the 17th and the 18th centuries by some tribes who migrated from Najd in the 16th century to the coasts of the Arabian Gulf in Zubarah. The migrant people were called Al-Utub because of their departure from Najd after the severe drought which led them to move to Zubarah. Then Al-Utub moved to Kuwait and settled there. Some of them worked in pearl diving. Their work flourished and the population began to burgeon in the city. Then Sheikh Sabah bin Jabir was chosen to be the first ruler in the year 1752. This was because of the need for a leader to give orders, a counselor to help resolve problems, and a judge on issues and disputes. His judgment was based on consultations with respected citizens on the most important issues. People obeyed his verdict, which conformed with the Islamic law. Throughout the history of the country, 3 walls were built to encircle Kuwait. The first was built during the reign of Sheikh Abdullah bin Sabah al-Sabah in 1760. The second wall was built in 1814 and the third was built in 1920 during the reign of Sheikh Salim al-Sabah. The construction of the walls were purely for defensive purposes after Kuwait became engaged in a number of wars. KTV2 pays salute and tribute to the homage of all the patriots who have made the supreme sacrifice to safeguard the freedom and sovereignty of the State of Kuwait, and we wish everyone out there a happy national celebration.